Can you put on my first slide?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Zoo, the Our World Speaker Series, and welcome to the second day of summer. Finally here, love it. My name is Tyler Allen. I'm the Community Program Specialist here. I got the Community Program Supervisor, not Specialist. That doesn't matter to anybody but me. Anyway, thank you for coming. Like always, I always want to thank a couple folks, a couple organizations, the Minnesota Legacy Amendment. They made this program free for all of you, so we definitely want to thank them. And also MinPost, they are the media sponsor for this event. So if you haven't ever gone online and checked out their Earth blog, definitely do so. It's a great place to learn more information. So again, thank you for coming. We'll make this a very short introduction because we're going to jump into bears. Last month you were here, we had Sloth Stapleton talking about polar bears. Tonight we have Dave Garshelis talking about bears of the world. So without further ado, I turn over to Dave. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks. Oops. Gave you a hint there. Okay, I'm Dave Garshelis. I work for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources as a bear research biologist, study black bears. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota, so I have students that study bears all over the world. And I'm co-chair of a group within the IUCN. So this is the Bear Specialist Group within the IUCN. The IUCN is the largest conservation organization in the world. They have special groups for each taxa. And the Bear Specialist Group has all the species of bears except polar bears. I'll talk a little bit about polar bears tonight. Some of you already heard Seth Stapleton, was my previous student, come and give a whole lecture about polar bears. So we'll start off with some trivia about bears. This would be the great bear of the north. And in what constellation is the North Star? Anybody? I heard Ursa Major. Anything else? Ursa Minor. Ah. Oh. So remember that is the Big Dipper, which is the tail of the bear, which is ridiculous because bears have like a tail about that long. But the Greeks, I guess, thought that they had a long tail, and this points to the North Star, which is up here, which is in the Little Dipper. All right, how about the second one? Why is the northernmost region of the Earth called the Arctic? What does that have to do with a bear? As a hint, Arctic. So the word Arctic comes from Arctos, Greek for bear. So everything in the north is the Great Bear, the North Pole, and the Little Bear. Okay, one last trivia question for you. What kind of a bear is this? Is it the golden moon bear, the sun bear, the lion bear, the black-maned sloth bear, the Baluchistan sand bear, or the Hokkaido brown bear? We'll have a little vote. Who votes for golden moon bear? A couple people. Sun bear. A few more. Lion bear. Nobody. Oh yeah, one. Black-maned sloth bear. Ooh, a lot of people on that one. The Baluchistan sand bear. A few on that one. And the Hokkaido brown bear. All right, we got a smattering of people on all of them. I'll be telling you what the answer to that one is later. All right, these are the bears of the world. And what we're specifically going to be talking about are some of these species headed for extinction. Who thinks yes? Who thinks they know which species? All right. We'll see what happens as we go through them. So it's just these 8. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the species of bears that have already gone extinct. I'm not going to go through them all because there's actually quite a few. This, by the way, was being sold on eBay. Who's heard of the cave bear? So the cave bear is actually multiple species of animals whose remains have been found a lot in caves in Europe. And we've identified now 3 different species that have gone extinct some 27,000 or so years ago. These are some drawings of what cave bears might look like. Who's heard of short-faced bears? So short-faced bears, this is actually a whole subfamily of bears. And all the black ones there are species that have gone extinct. There's 10 of them. And they lived in North and South America only. And there's only one remaining species of this group, and that's the Andean bear that lives in South America. We'll get back to that one later. But the most famous, I guess, of the short-faced bears is the giant short-faced bear, which went extinct about 12,000 years ago. And just as an idea here of how big this bear was, this is a picture, a drawing from back in the Pleistocene. You can see lions there, mammoths. And that's the giant short-faced bear, and that's the grizzly bear. So somewhere around twice the size. And then this is the last species of bear that has gone extinct. And this is the Florida cave bear. Who's heard of that? Not too many. So it's interesting, this species, the Florida cave bear, was found in caves in Florida, but it's also found as far west as like Idaho. Went extinct about 8,000 years ago. And we obtained this very rare photograph from the people that lived back 8,000 years ago. And we were able to digitally enhance it, and we came up with a picture of an Andean bear, which is the only present short-faced bear. But this is what it's closely related to, the Andean bear, because we don't know that the Florida cave bear had eye rings and all that other stuff. We know that it was a lot larger than the present-day Andean bear. The top there is the skull of an Andean bear. The bottom is the mandible of a Florida cave bear. Now on to the living bears. What species is this? Who votes for the black bear? Okay, the black bear. Actually, this would be the American black bear because, as I'll be showing you later, there are 2 species of black bear. And we live in the US, we tend to call it the black bear. Ursus americanus, meaning the bear of the Americas. And of course, black bears also come in brown. We sometimes call this shade of brown, this reddish brown, the cinnamon bear because it looks sort of a cinnamon color. In Minnesota, it's somewhere around maybe 8% or so of the bears are this brown color. If you look across the United States, in the eastern part of the United States, it's almost 0 are brown phase. By the time you get to California, it's about 80–85% are brown phase. Nobody actually knows why these brown phase bears are more adapted to the West. One theory is that they're trying to blend in with grizzly bears, look like grizzly bears. Another is that in dry environments, that this is actually better as far as their thermoregulation to be brown in the dry, more open environments rather than a black color bear. What other color do black bears come in? White. Yep, and it's not just albinos, but it's this bear right here, which was named the Kermode bear. These live on just some islands in British Columbia. And those 2 bears right there are actually siblings. So you can have one black one and one white one born to the same mother. And genetically, these bears, the reason that they're white is the same gene that makes a yellow Labrador yellow instead of black. It's the same gene in bears. So we actually have had some white bears in Minnesota. So White Bear Lake, for example, is named after a white bear, but it was actually a different gene. So we've had one since then, and it's actually a different gene that also can turn them white. So this is the historic range of American black bears. They've only existed in Canada, United States, and Mexico. I'll show you a map of how that has changed. That's where they live presently. So you can see that they've basically disappeared from the plains areas where they were never very common anyway. They live sort of in river bottoms and forest corridors through the prairies. The Lewis and Clark expedition actually did run across some black bears on their route, even though it's primarily grizzly bears. They tend to live in forested environments. This would be a typical forested environment from northern Minnesota, but forest varies a lot across North America, of course. You have these wet forests like this in Alaska, these dry forests like this in Mexico. And then this is northwestern Minnesota, where it's only about 20% forest, and we have the most robust, actually, black bear population in Minnesota in terms of growth rate. Big bears, a lot of reproduction going on, is because these forests have lots of light penetrating them, and so there's lots of food. There's also lots of sunflowers, lots of corn for the bears to eat. And so this actually is one of the best bear populations in Minnesota living in this area. The species of bear is extremely adaptable. They don't really have to worry about denning places. People used to think about bears being sort of having critical denning places, but this is a den of a mother and two of her yearlings in Minnesota. You can see one of the yearlings is brown, one black here. They're just tucked into this nest. The more typical den is a big male down in a dugout den that he dug and brought in all that straw. This is actually fairly typical for male bears in Minnesota to den out in these cattail swamps like this. This bear decided to den in a beaver dam. A little bit wet, snowing on it. Why didn't the snow melt off his back? They have really good insulation. So basically, it's the ends of their hairs are just basically freezing. So these bears give birth in the middle of the winter in January. Great time in Minnesota, right? But it's so that the cubs, when they come out, basically are big enough to walk around. Now, people think of black bears as having two cubs. And that's because you're used to seeing stuff on TV of bears with two cubs. Those are primarily Western bears. Western bears tend to have two cubs. Eastern bears tend to have more likely three cubs. Bears in Minnesota, the average is about 2.6, but 3 is more common than 2. So this is a very prolific species of bears, the largest litter size of any bear. They can have litters not uncommonly 4, more rarely 5, very rarely, but occasionally 6. And these populations of American black bears have been spreading across the United States and Canada, increasing. These are states where black bears were extirpated, completely wiped out, and then came back. Rhode Island, Kentucky, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, Nevada, and Ohio. And you can see all of these blue are sightings of bears. Lots of them over here in eastern Ohio. You can see lots of sightings here in Florida. So the deal with this bear is it's not only prolific, it's also very adaptable to different kinds of habitats, and also is not very scared of humans, blends in with humans very well, seeks out human foods like these cabins, cornfields. All of this up here is all damage done by bears. Occasionally walk the streets of Duluth. Very comfortable eating sunflowers near people's houses. Maybe fall asleep. And then people are not very scared of these bears either. And so people feed bears, they pet bears. You know, we don't recommend this. In fact, this was illegal, but people do this, put out feeders and whatnot and feed these bears because these bears are really not very dangerous. It's a very docile bear. Very few people are attacked by this species, but that's not to say that nobody is. There are attacks that occur every year, and there's usually 1 or 2 people that are killed by black bears every year. But they are a pretty docile species. They blend in with humans very well. They are hunted in 12 Canadian provinces, in 32 US states. They're hunted for sport, they're hunted for meat, they're hunted for their hides. In most places like Minnesota, it's illegal to shoot a bear and not eat it. As an indication of how these bear populations have expanded across the United States, these are all the states that have had new bear hunting seasons since the year 2000. New Jersey, the first season in 33 years. Maryland, the first season in 51 years. Kentucky, the first ever season since, you know, back in the Daniel Boone days. Oklahoma, Nevada, and Florida is proposing the season now for next year. So this means that these populations have all been increasing and can be basically sustainably harvested and through a controlled harvest by agencies like the one that I work with. All right, so that is one species. This is another one now. What is this? What we hear? Grizzly bear? Brown bear? Is it grizzly bear or brown bear? Same thing. Bingo. So this species is called Ursus arctos. It's either the brown bear or the grizzly bear. I'll get into that differentiation in a minute, but what does Ursus arctos mean? Ursus is Latin for bear. Arctos, I told you in the beginning, is Greek for bear. Bear, bear. This is the bear bear. This species was named by Linnaeus. This is in the first book of, you know, having scientific names of species. And he's Swedish, and this bear is right out of his doorstep. And he is the only bear that he was aware of, and he called it the bear bear. And so we have brown-colored ones that live on the coast of North America. They're called brown bears. We have this color, this grizzled color, are called grizzly bears. And this color bear lives in interior North America. And they tend to have a pretty sort of a temperament where they're pretty aggressive. And so they have a reputation for attacking people and being kind of nasty bears. But they also live in Europe. They also live in Asia. And they come in all sorts of different colors, like these darker ones on Kamchatka. This is from Tibet. This is still a brown bear. So we have brown-colored black bears and black-colored brown bears. You can see this guy has a ring up here on the back of his neck. So this is now the historic range of brown bears. You can see it across the whole sort of northern part of the globe. Note also that they occurred in the Middle East, like even places like Egypt. They occurred in Morocco. They occurred in Algeria. And they were in Morocco until like the late 1800s. But they were back in Egypt, back in the days of the pharaohs and whatnot. They talked about bears. They talked about bears in the cedar forest of Lebanon and everything else. It's in the Bible that there were bears and whatnot. And so they're not there anymore, but they're still in quite a bit of their range. 48 different countries. It's the most widely distributed species of bear. So I'll just show you that again so you can get a view of that. Take a look at North America now. You can see they lived all the way down into Mexico here. And they only live in 2% now of the lower 48 states, and they're gone in Mexico. So what happened in North America is when people brought cattle to North America, these bears started killing cattle and people were not too happy about it. So people started killing bears, specifically directed at grizzly bears. Not so much at black bears, because black bears really weren't killing cattle. And people would go after specific animals. They would have animals named. They would actually have wanted signs, in bars and whatnot. Wanted such and such bear, and people would get rewards for going out and killing these bears. So these are the guys that were the heroes that killed the last bear in Mexico, 1960. And their picture is framed here. They're very happy about it. Imagine today hunting the last of a certain species in a country and being proud of it. That's how much things have changed since 1960. This shows the bears of Europe. So all of these countries in Europe once had bears. Even the UK once had bears. There's now 10 populations of bears in Europe. All of them are increasing. Some of them are still quite small, like these two populations here in Spain and France. Very small populations of bears. These two populations here in Italy, all with less than 200 bears, some of them with less than 20 bears. The big issue with some of these bear populations in Europe are basically conflicts with sheep, because these bears do kill sheep, and these populations would be expanding a lot further, except for the fact that they run into these issues with sheep or with people. So like bears wandering into Switzerland. There have been bears that wandered back into Switzerland, but basically the people in Switzerland didn't like them so much and would kill them every time that they get there. This is just one snapshot of some bear populations in Asia and estimates of the populations. You can see here in the Tibetan Plateau, 6,300 bears. Very small population of bears up here in the Gobi, maybe somewhere around 30 bears or so. There's some studies that are going on in the Gobi on bears with the radio collaring and whatnot. You can see this is what it looks like. Pretty desolate place for a bear to live. They eat a lot of roots and things. Not very much water, of course. This is what the bears look like. They're about the size of American black bears. Very small. You can see it right there. Very small brown bears. Here's a population of bears in Pakistan. These bears are quite distinctive. They have these markings on them. And basically all of the individual bears are individually recognizable by the guys that work in this park, this Dosai National Park. And they've kept track of them over the years. And you can see that the population has been increasing through protection, just keeping poachers away, keeping people from killing them. Population's actually doing pretty well. But it's interesting to have a population monitored on specific individuals, almost like you hear about whales with tail flukes that are individually recognizable. These bears are as well. And then we just got this recent information about bears recolonizing Syria. We don't know where they came from. The closest population would be up here in Turkey, about 400 kilometers away. And they ended up with bear tracks over here. And a recent photo, we're not positive it's a bear, but that's the photo that somebody took on their cell phone during a snowstorm. And you can imagine in Syria, with all the fighting and whatnot going on, that it's pretty interesting to come up with the first bear photo there in about 60 years. Okay, now we're into some other species. This species comes from South America. I showed the picture before. What is it? Andean bear, yep. Tremarctos ornatus. So this basically means the ornate bear. It has these eye rings. Used to be called, and some people still call it, in fact in the zoo world it's still often called the spectacled bear, meaning these. Not speckled, doesn't have any speckles, but it has spectacles. But not always. You can see this bear in the back here has a white face. Very often they have dark faces. There's some places in South America where all the bears have dark faces and don't have the white eye rings. So this says that the distribution of this species is in 6 countries. This is very recent, actually. We always said that they lived in 5 countries. That they lived in Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And there was a lot of debate about whether they ever crossed the line into Argentina. So this little triangle down here is still basically Bolivia. And then there were some claw marks found on trees. There were some footprints found that looked like bears in Argentina, and everybody disputed it. and the Bolivians and Argentinians don't get along very well, and they always said it's not really bears. And then there was some hair samples collected that were on some trees, and those turned out to be genetically analyzed and found to be this species of bear. So they do live in 6 range countries. Now I want to talk about, I said that I co-chair a group, the Bear Specialist Group in the IUCN, the largest conservation organization in the world. The IUCN has these categories of basically how threatened or endangered species are. This is globally. This is not the US endangered species list. This is the global endangered species list. And these are the categories. You start off with least concerned, near threatened, and then there's these 3 categories of threatened, vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered before you get to extinction. So all of the bears I'm going to be talking about now are in this category, vulnerable. They're vulnerable of extinction, but they're not to the endangered or critically endangered point yet. There'll be one species that I get to at the end that is endangered. So this species, the Indian bear, is vulnerable. Lives in a variety of different habitats. Some really low elevation stuff to really high elevation stuff, over 4,000 meters here. This is from a study that was done in Peru, and you can see this bear and its cub walking along this ledge here. Pretty agile bears. They look like they're stuck to the wall, don't they? The species is most noted for living in high altitude cloud forests, where they eat bromeliads. Anybody know what those are? Yeah, things that look like pineapples. In some places, they eat leafy material. But they also are noted to kill cattle. And for a long time, this was debated whether bears ever did this or whether they're just getting blamed for it. And it was really mountain lions killing the cattle. But they do kill some cattle. Mountain lions also kill the cattle, and the ranchers are not too happy about the bears doing this. Sometimes what they'll do is when they have a dead cow like this, they'll put some poison in it, wait for the next animal to come back. Might not have been the animal that killed that cow, but that is the unfortunate animal that comes over and eats that cow and gets killed by the poison. Or I've been in places where they set up electric fence to either electrocute the animal. I almost walked into one time a set gun. It was set by somebody's field. We just came on to look at some damage, and if you tripped across the wire, it would have shot whatever animal, human or whatever that happened to walk by. This is believed to be one of the major causes of mortality for bears, but the fact of the matter is, or this species of bear, the fact of the matter is nobody's actually done a study on this. We don't really even know how big an impact this kind of human retribution is causing on their bear populations. All right, we're going to move to Asia now, because most of these other bear species are in Asia. Anybody have an idea what this species is? Let me hear it. Anybody say sloth bear? If you said sloth bear, raise your hand. There we go. We have somebody. Beautiful. So this species is recognized by this big shaggy coat and this really white muzzle and really long lips and this white chest marking. Sloth bear. Mel Ursus ursinus. So Ursus is bear, ursinus is bear, Mel means honey bear. This bear really likes honey. Of course, just about all the bears like honey except for really pandas and bears. But the thing is, this is the species that in India is noted for being the dancing bear. They often rewarded it with honey, and so it sort of made sense to call this bear the honey bear. But where did sloth bear come from? So they have this big shaggy coat. They're actually missing a couple of teeth here. And so if you just had like a dead specimen of this, it could look like it's in the sloth family. And actually the first specimen that was sent back from India to England got messed up in a crate of animals from South America, and it looked like it might have been related to a sloth. And they used to call this the bear-like sloth, and then they changed it to the sloth-like bear, and then eventually changed it to the sloth bear. But it doesn't hang upside down. It doesn't move slowly. It's a bear. It's a real bear. And this is its full distribution, its historic distribution on the Indian subcontinent. This is how it's changed. They only live in India, Sri Lanka, Nepal. Now, we don't actually know about Bhutan. It was presumed that it lived in Bhutan, but there's actually no real solid historic evidence that they did live in Bhutan. We're trying to find that out now. They did definitely live in Bangladesh, but they're gone. They disappeared probably about 20 years ago from Bangladesh. I say disappeared, meaning they were killed out. And that map is probably a little misleading because it doesn't show you how patchy the distribution is. The red here shows the places where we definitely know this bear exists. The yellow are places where we think they could exist based on the habitat, but we don't actually know. So there's a lot of questions about the connectivity of these different small populations, and some are very tiny and might only have, 15 bears or something living there. There's a lot to learn about them, about that, whether they really live in this whole yellow zone or just the red zone or somewhere in between that. I'm showing you this picture from 1807. This is an interesting painting. This is from when the British are in India. And basically, here's the quote. It says, "To the native, the bear is a foe to be shirked unless under the protecting convoy of European sportsmen. And the whole village will gladly turn out to beat a field." So this is a sloth bear that was in a field. They got all the horses here. They drove the bear out of the field. And here's a guy up here ready to shoot it. Now, these bears were hunted by British sportsmen. There's lots of stories about hunting these bears. I mean, they were primarily after tigers, elephants, rhinos, but they also hunted bears as sort of a secondary species. But there's all kinds of sort of exciting stories by these British guys that are stationed in India hunting bears. Here's one of those stories. This guy was up on this ledge. The bear was in a cave on this ledge. He poked his gun in, shot the bear. The bear was only injured, came roaring out to attack the guy, jumped on the guy. They fell off the cliff, falling down here. Here's the bear's cub also falling down. And the guy miraculously grabs onto this little tree, saves himself, somehow climbs up onto the cliff, and writes a book about it. Whether that all happened, who knows? But made for a great story in 1906. The thing that we do know is that these bears do inhabit caves quite a bit. You can see that this is a typical bear habitat. All this bouldery area here. Here's a bear coming out of the cave. They also live in the presence of rhinos, tigers, and these termite mounds, which we'll be talking about in a minute. So here's a picture of these bears parading out of their caves, basically at dusk. So as the temperature cools down, it's 105 degrees or whatever in the middle of the day in India, these bears are hunkered down in their caves. As it starts to cool down, they come out, and here they would be coming down from here, down into these people's fields and whatnot, eating some of their crops. People would then, of course, be there at night, trying to chase these bears out of their fields. And these are very ferocious bears. These are nothing like a sloth. These are actually the most ferocious bears of the species of 8. Far more people are killed by this species than all the other bears put together. So we have people losing eyes like this. They go after people's faces. The interesting thing is they're such a ferocious bear, and what do they mainly eat? Termites. This is a termite-eating bear, a myrmecophagous bear, meaning a termite eater. They eat primarily ants and termites. And that's why they have the missing 2 teeth here, is they can suck up termites like that. But they have these long claws for digging in the termite mounds. And you can see the gap there, the missing teeth. They have these long lips for having suction to suck up the termites. You can hear these bears like a half a mile away. But then they also have really big canines, huge, stout canines. What would they have those for? Think of the animals that live with this bear. Tigers. So this bear lives in India, where it interacts with tigers quite a bit, and it needs to be able to defend itself from tigers, and so it has these really big canines, and these bears are very effective at defending themselves from tigers. In fact, I had a student that studied this species of bears. He personally witnessed 5 attacks by tigers on sloth bears, and the sloth bear won 4 out of 5 times. But that's why they're so aggressive. That's why they're aggressive to people, and that's why they chew people and stuff with these big canines and these big sharp claws, because of this, basically this always trying to defend themselves from tigers, and basically humans have taken the place of tigers as something that drives these bears completely crazy. You can see how good at diggers they are. This was the student that did the work on up here. This hole, we actually watched this bear dig this hole. It took about 2 hours to dig 6 feet down just to get a colony of termites. Imagine all of that work to dig down in there to go, and then to crawl out of the hole and leave. All right, a related looking species of bear, but this is not a sloth bear. This is a different species of bear. What is this one? Asiatic black bear. Thank you. Ursus tibetanus, the bear of Tibet. There's actually a very small population of this bear. It lives in Tibet. It was first found in Tibet, which is why it was called Ursus tibetanus. They thought that it was restricted to there, but that's not the case. One of the big characteristics of this bear are these ears, sort of Mickey Mouse looking ears. Kind of makes you wonder through evolution, why would a bear have such giant ears? What is it trying to hear? Don't really know. Of course, why would it have a white chin also? You can see this bear does not have that bright white muzzle that the sloth bear had. But otherwise, they're pretty similar looking, right? Here's the white muzzle. This is the sloth bear. It's got this white crescent here. This bear also has this white crescent. It's often called the moon bear because it has a crescent moon on its chest. And that brings us to the golden moon bear. So this is a phase of the Asiatic black bear. So who voted for golden moon bear? Hey, pick up your prize after the talk and be in the back. It's a pretty rare colored phase of this species. I don't know anything about the genetics of this. But here's the historic range of this species in 18 countries. And when you talk about historic, we only go back about 500 years. If you actually go back to fossil evidence for this species, it went all the way to France, all throughout Europe. But then it somehow disappeared throughout there. It disappeared basically in Iran and whatnot, almost all of Iran. It sort of hung out in this portion over here. And you can see that in the past 500 years, this has changed to this. It's still in the same 18 countries, but a lot more fragmented range. Most of the population is in China. About half of these bears live in China. This is a guy in China. He was telling us about how he had a bear in his cornfield. He was trying to chase it out, and the bear bit his back. So this bear is a lot more aggressive, way more aggressive than our American black bear. Not as aggressive as a sloth bear, but still very aggressive. Not anything like the temperament of American black bears. And that's why it's harder for people to live with this bear than we live with American black bears. It's not that these people are less tolerant. It's just that they're living with a bear that is actually far more dangerous. Now, this bear also evolved with tigers. Should have warned you about that picture coming up. There's a guy in China that his face was chewed off by a bear. The biggest conservation issue for this species is poaching. It's a huge issue. And people set some traps like this, snares. This is actually a picture I took of a poaching camp in China in a very well protected panda reserve. Who's heard of Wolwang? Very famous panda reserve. They protect pandas very well. They don't protect bears very well. So these people are poaching bears in the middle of a panda reserve. And here's lots of snaring. One of my students back here, Lorraine Scottson, studying bears in Lao PDR, and they patrol and pick up snares and collect hundreds of these snares set out for these bears. And what people are after are the gallbladders of the bears. Who's heard of this as a reason to poach bears? So what is a gallbladder? Why do people want a gallbladder? Is this some kind of a trophy thing? Is this some kind of an aphrodisiac? Does it give you lots of energy? What's the deal with this? It's actually a medicine, a real medicine. It has medicinal qualities. It's been proven through clinical tests that it works as an anti-inflammatory. It works for various liver diseases. It works as basically a thing for eye ailments. It's possibly the best potential drug in the future for Alzheimer's. For all sorts of things. And that's the scary thing about it, is like, if only bears produce this stuff, it's only in the gallbladder of a bear, then maybe it's worthwhile to be poaching bears to get this really valuable medicine. It's been a traditional Chinese medicine for at least 1,300 years. People say 2,000 years sometimes. It does really work, but it can be synthesized. In fact, it's approved by the FDA. There's a drug called Urso, which you can get in the US. And it's for things like dissolving gallstones. I think it's the only thing it's approved for in the US. In China, what they decided, and this was before this product was synthesized, they decided that the best way to provide this medicine to their people would be to farm bears. So back in the early 80s, they devised a way of extracting this from the gallbladders of bears without killing the bears. They basically had different kinds of catheter systems and whatnot, or needle systems. There's several other countries that basically copied the Chinese and set up farms. Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, South Korea. These three countries basically anesthetize the bear. They find the gallbladder, they use a big needle, and they extract the bile. In China, they use a catheter system. As you can see in this picture here, the bear basically comes into its cage. I took this picture. The bear was outside in the pen, and they basically called for the bear, came into the cage. They put some rice here. They surgically connect the gallbladder to the skin through a very small tube. It's basically a tissue tube, but it's so narrow that it won't drip. Okay? It just sort of closes off on itself. And so this guy crawls under the cage and sticks basically a small straw into that tissue tube, which opens it up and it drips, and he sticks a little pan underneath it and collects the bile. And then this stuff is either sold as a liquid, or it's dried and sold as a powder, or put in a capsule form. And the idea was to provide the Chinese people with an adequate amount of this medicine. But then they said, we're also helping to conserve bears, because now people don't have to poach bears anymore. We have all these bears on farms. We have 20,000 bears on farms. We don't have to poach bears anymore. That problem is over. Maybe. Okay, so the deal is that one thing is that in stocking these farms, they did have to poach bears. That's the only way to get the bears onto the farm. So they had to collect all these. And we still don't know if these farms are self-sustaining. They claim that they are. We don't know for sure that that's the case. The second issue is, imagine people that are buying this product, this legal bear bile from farms. You just go to a pharmacy, you pick it up, you don't even need a prescription for it. But doctors will give you a prescription for it, but you basically can go there, get it off the shelf. Sometimes it's mixed with other herbs and whatnot. And let's say you try this stuff, and let's say it works. Works pretty good, you feel pretty good about it. You start taking it more, you start feeling good about it. Some people actually take it every day, like with your orange juice, you know? A little bit of bear bile, feeling great, yeah, feeling really healthy. Now somebody in your family gets like really sick with a liver disease, and you buy some of this, and they're not getting better. Do you give up? Or do you think to yourself, I might just spend a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, for my mom and buy the real stuff, the powerful stuff, the stuff from the wild. That stuff is more pure, it's more potent, it comes from the wild, it's not some farm animal that was eating rice, it's bears that are eating like meat. And so it's possible that this has actually caused more people to buy the real product from dead bears. And you can go to a market in China and you can have somebody show you a dead bear or a whole gallbladder with paws and say, this is the real thing. You pay a lot more money for it. It's actually not known right now. We don't know if the farm product is causing more poaching or has it caused less poaching. We don't know that. And we're actually involved right now with the Chinese trying to initiate a study to find out which of those two things is the real answer. But then you have this third product, right? You have the synthesized product. And if we could only convince people to switch to that, because it actually has the only active ingredient that is in both the wild and the farm product. And it's ursodeoxycholic acid. It's one bile acid that is the active ingredient that only bears have it in large quantities. And it's believed that it helps protect them during hibernation, helps protect their cells from degenerating during hibernation. But you can take this from the bile of a dead chicken or a dead pig, you know, all these animals that are killed for human use anyway, and you can chemically just tweak it a little bit, and you can get ursodeoxycholic acid. And that's what urso is. The Chinese claim that that active ingredient by itself is not as good as that active ingredient mixed with 100 other different kinds of compounds that are in bear bile. We don't know. We don't know what the real answer is. There's never been a clinical trial of bear bile versus synthesized product, the urso. Nobody knows that. We know that the synthesized product works. We know that bear bile works. We don't know which one might work better for particular kinds of ailments. The other kind of gross thing is that people in China really like bear paws, bear feet. So this is not a medicine. This is not an aphrodisiac. This does not do anything for you. This is basically a delicacy. This is something where you go to a restaurant, and if you're real rich, you can show off to your friends that I can afford some bear paw soup, and everybody should feel great about it. And so this has become a very big issue, particularly of bears being poached in Russia. And bear paws, this is what this is, a confiscated shipment from Russia into China. All right, enough gross stuff about Asiatic black bears. What species of bear is this? Sun bear. And how do we know that? It has a sun on its chest. All right. So that's one giveaway. The other is it has very tiny ears, so opposite the Asiatic black bear kind of thing. Very short hair, sometimes called a dog bear because it has very short hair. This bear sort of maxes out at about 130 pounds or so as a full-grown adult animal. You can see these very long claws here. Now they don't all have a sun on their chest, even though they are called the sun bear, Hel arctos, sun bear of Malaya. Some of them actually have a similar kind of a moon thing on their chest. This bear probably has the most individualistic markings of any of the bears, even pandas. These individuals are actually easier to tell apart because they have these little spots, they have sort of jagged, curved things. And the historic distribution of this species, again in the last 500 years or so, is just Southeast Asia. And 11 countries in Southeast Asia. And you can see it's down to 9 countries now. We actually lost the species in China, but this might actually be wrong, and maybe we're back up to 10. There was some evidence recently that we thought this bear was lost from Bangladesh, and there's some evidence now. Some people are sending some photos from camera traps and whatnot that looks like this species, a few of them, still persist in Bangladesh. So that's a good news thing. This is kind of a typical habitat for sun bears, this sort of lush, tropical, rainforest, lowland type forest. They eat all kinds of different fruits, hundreds of different kinds of fruits, even in a specific study area, hundreds of different kinds of fruits. But what happens in this area, in this tropical area, is that everything will fruit at once, this giant masting event, and then it all disappears. Then all of a sudden there's no fruit anymore. And these bears turn to insects. These bears are actually really good at climbing trees. This picture is actually taken by a tourist. And what this bear is doing is a mother and her cub is chewing through the bark of this tree, and she's got a really long tongue, the longest tongue of any species of bear, like this. She sticks it into the hole of a bee nest, but they're not stinging bees, they're stingless bees. They're like flies. And they basically stick their tongue in there and they eat these stingless bees. They also eat ground beetles, they eat termites. There's a bear scratching away at a log to get at some termites. Now they can do this for quite a while, but they're not like sloth bears, where sloth bears can just live on ants and termites. This bear can do that for months and months, and then eventually, as the months are turning into years and the fruit isn't coming back, there's not really enough to eat, they start to get skinnier, skinnier, and they eventually starve to death. And this is the only species of bear that we actually know of now that routinely starves to death naturally as part of a normal process of lots of fruit and then no fruit. This is exacerbated, though, through climate change events and through loss of habitat. What happens when these bears start to starve is they start to seek out human sources of food, like all other bears do. This woman had some coconut trees growing. They don't actually eat the coconuts, but they'll climb up the tree and eat the last part, the succulent part, the meristem, the growing part. And that causes the tree to die. And you can't blame these people to put out some traps or poison or get somebody to kill the bear when they have their trees wiped out like this. I wanted to show you that there's a sort of a gradient from this species of bear. This is kind of a hot spot of where this species lives. In Indonesia and Malaysia. There's a place right there called the Isthmus of Kra, and black bears, Asiatic black bears, do not cross that line. Sun bears go north of that line, but there's a big change basically in habitat south of here, and this is the main stronghold of sun bears. That's where most of the sun bears live. But this is what's happening to that area. It's being cut. This is forest cover in Sumatra from 1985 to 1990 to 2000 to 2007. So that's all sun bear habitat disappearing before our eyes. Same thing happening in Borneo. You see up here, 1973, almost all of Borneo with really nice forests. This is all the red areas all being cleared away. These are all forest roads here. And the only intact natural forest left is up here in the highlands. And this is previously logged forest in this lighter green, this industrial forest in the black area. So you can see major issues with habitat loss for the species. And what's being replanted after the forest is gone is palm oil primarily. So Malaysia and Indonesia are the big palm oil producing countries in the world. Palm oil in the United States is sometimes labeled as vegetable oil. You don't even know. Sometimes if you want to be a conservationist and avoid palm oil, sometimes you can't. You read the package label, it says vegetable oil. You don't know if you're getting palm oil or not. Basically, most processed foods will have some palm oil in them. Sometimes they put it in or not put it in. You don't even know. It's a very cheap oil. It's actually fairly nutritious. This was a study site of another student I have back here, Roshan. He worked in this site up here in Sabah, right here in this part of Malaysia. This is forest along this river. Most of the white out here is palm oil. This is what it looks like on the ground. You can see the trees up here from the forest abut right up against the palm oil plantation. They cut the palm oil, put it down here on the ground, wait for a truck to come by and pick it up. There's some pieces that fall off on the ground like this. And you can imagine a bear that might come out there and find some of this is a pretty nice treat. Did some interviews. A lot of Roshan's thesis had to do with interviewing people about whether bears are a big nuisance in these palm oil plantations. And what he found out is that basically they don't see the bears very much. Lots of monkeys, lots of wild pigs coming through. Sometimes elephants will come through and wreck the trees and whatnot. But people don't really see the bears, and that's because primarily the bears are nocturnal. So they stay in the forest during the daytime. If they do come out and walk around, they'll be walking around at night. But again, it's a very nutritious kind of a food. You can't blame the bear for, especially if the fruits in the forest are not there. Why wouldn't they go out and eat these palm oil fruits? And actually, bears that live near palm oil plantations tend to be quite fat. It's probably pretty good nutrition. But if you're a bear living in a forest over here, how far into this palm oil plantation will you go? You know, are you going to go a quarter mile? Are you going to go 4 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles into this palm oil plantation? You know, eventually you're pretty far away from home. You're into some dangerous territory with humans. There are people hunting there. And so it's likely that if this palm oil provides them some nutrition, it's probably just sort of a narrow strip, mainly along the edge of the forest. So as you cut more and more forest and you get further and further away from the forest, that palm oil is no longer giving the bears any nutrition. All right, we got 2 species left. We're going to the Arctic now. This would be the sea bear, right? That's what that says, Ursus maritimus, the sea bear, or the polar bear. So this species is a marine mammal. It's officially classified as a marine mammal. In all sort of international treaties, it's recognized as a marine mammal. It's under the U.S. Marine Mammal Protection Act, and so it has under a whole different set of laws. I mentioned that the IUCN Bear Specialist Group has 7 species of bears, not this one, and that's because it is a marine mammal, and it's in its own specialist group. There's a specialist group of a single species, just the polar bear. And it only lives in 5 countries. It lives in the United States, it lives in Canada. 2/3 of these bears live in Canada. It lives in Russia, it lives in Denmark, well, Greenland, and lives in Norway, well, Svalbard. The prime places where these bears live are these dark purple areas. So why do these bears need ice? What's the deal with the ice? What's so big about melting ice and polar bears? Seals, that's correct. Very good answer. So the deal is that not that they can't walk on land, it's not that they need to stay cold, it's that it provides a platform for eating. It's the only way that they can eat is to catch seals off of the ice. If you don't have ice, they can't catch seals, and so then they can't eat. Now, it's actually a little more complicated than that. There's different kinds of ice as shaded here. I'm going to talk about this green area, which is called seasonal ice. About a third of the polar bears in the world live on this seasonal ice. And each of these letters here are distinct populations of bears. There's 19 or 20 populations of polar bears, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that live on this seasonal ice. And seasonal ice means ice that melts in the summer. It's gone. Has nothing to do with climate change. It's always been this way. Those populations, the ice has disappeared in the summertime. So what do the polar bears do? They swim around all summer. Do they migrate to a different population? What do? They come out on land. They basically live on land all summer. And that's what they've been doing and evolved to do for eons in this area. And it might be 2 or 3 months that they live on land. And what do they eat when they're on land? Nothing. They fast. They go through a fasting period of 2 or 3 months. And then the females go into their dens immediately after that. When it freezes over, everybody else goes back out on the ice. The pregnant females, they go into a den. And then they sit there until the next April. So they could be fasting for 10 months. No food, 10 months. The longest fasting of any mammal in the world. These guys are super adapted to fasting with no food. Polar bears. But here's the deal. So by the year 2040, the projections indicate that there's still going to be some ice up here in the Arctic in March. By September, the end of the summer, the entire Arctic, except up here in northern Greenland and some places in Canada. But all of these polar bears will all be along the shore. They will all be fasting. So even the bears that don't do it now are going to have to learn how to do it. And they'll probably be able to do it okay. The question is, if you're a female that has gone 10 months without food, what happens if you wake up in April and there isn't any ice? Then you got no food again. And then you have to go like another 6 months. And that's really where the crunch comes with polar bears, because they're not going to be able to reproduce if the females wake up and there isn't any ice, to go back out on the ice after 10 months of fasting and giving birth to cubs and being at your very smallest weight. And you have to have a seal, and you have to have a seal, and you wake up and you look out and it's blue water. And that's the issue with climate change and polar bears. So the question is, might they adapt? Might they eventually say, hey, it's been long enough. I know I'm supposed to eat seals, but hey, I came from a brown bear once, and these berries actually look pretty good. So far, they're not really doing that. They eat a few berries, not very much. We actually see polar bears with like blue butts, you know, like they've sat on the berries. They haven't quite figured out that they might be okay to eat. And what about, you hear about polar bears like eating seabirds or eating eggs of geese or these murres. And it's becoming more common, but not that common. You know, there's sort of reports occasionally in the literature of these bears eating eggs. And even if you're going to eat eggs, like try to keep a polar bear alive on eggs. No, not going to work. Polar bears actually have 5 special genes just for basically digesting fat. They are super good at digesting fat. That's what they're keyed in on, seal fat. That's what they live on. That's what they need. And eggs are not going to do it for them. The nice high protein in eggs, not for a polar bear. Even though there are millions of these geese in the Arctic. So the one question is, what about fish? What about penguins? Why don't polar bears eat penguins? Yes, they don't live in the Arctic. All right, what about salmon? So Arctic char, there's Arctic char runs in the Arctic. And there are polar bears right there. They come out on land, these fish come up these streams, they're roiling in the water like this. And the crazy thing is that they just don't know how to catch them. They're just terrible at catching fish. And they swat around in the water and they just seem like they can't do it. And it's just amazing to think that this species evolved from a brown bear, you know, when a brown bear can catch fish in its mouth. And they're just super at it. And the bad thing is that brown bears with climate change are moving north into these places, and they're actually potentially, if polar bears are trying to learn how to catch fish, they're going to be outcompeted by the brown bears moving north into these places where there's these salmon streams. So it's not looking so good for polar bears, and I can say that we don't actually know what's going to happen with them. Nobody really knows, but most polar bear biologists believe that they're cannot really adapt fast enough, learn how to eat berries, learn how to catch fish fast enough. And they certainly can't just go out and swim after a seal. Polar bears are really good swimmers. There was a polar bear recorded swimming for 8 days straight. Super good swimmers, but they're not fast enough to swim and catch a seal. Maybe a real sick seal or something like that. They really do need ice to catch seals, and seals really are, there's really basically 2 species of seals that they eat, and that's basically it. All right, last species. So I showed this species in the beginning as one of the 8 species of bears. And the question is it? Who thinks that this is a bear? Who thinks it's not a bear? Ha, so we have the audience split. Who thinks that that is a bear? Who thinks that's not a bear? What is that? All right, so that's a red panda or a lesser panda. Okay, and that's in a family by itself, a Euridae. People used to think it was related to raccoons or whatever, but it's not. But that was discovered first, and that was called a panda. That's where the name came from. And actually, we don't know what that name comes from. It's believed that the name comes from the word punya, which is bamboo eater in Nepal. And then this species was found. It was found basically by a French missionary in China. And he heard about this black and white bear. And so he had some people go out and collect one for him. And collect is kind of a polite name for like shoot one. And he got it and basically sent it back to France. And when he sent it back to France, he called this species Ursus melanoleuca, a black and white bear. Does it look like a bear too? And the guy in France said, no, it's a panda. It's just related to this other thing up here. It's a panda. We now know genetically that these species are unrelated. They're both pandas, and I'll show you why. But one of them is the giant panda, one of them is the lesser panda. The giant panda is now called Europoda. Europoda means panda foot, black and white panda foot. And that means it has a foot like a panda, the original panda. And that is that they both have kind of 6 toes, but not really 6 toes. Okay, so it's got 5 here and then a fake one, which is this bone right over here enlarged. And you can see the red panda also has 5 here and a fake one. And what do they use the fake one for? The fake one acts like a thumb, so they can eat carrots. So they can eat bamboo, right? So both of these are bamboo eaters, and they use that as a way of basically holding bamboo. And that's what that sixth digit is for. And that's why they're both called pandas, and they both have that. And this is called convergent evolution. It's two species, both of them eating the same thing, basically only bamboo, and both of them solving the problem of holding that bamboo in the same way by increasing the size of that little bone. But one of them is a bear, and one of them is a family on its own. And actually, there were more than this one species of giant panda. We know of about 5 other species of giant pandas in the past that are now extinct. So this is the range of this species of giant panda. You see it comes out here to eastern China and actually goes to the northern part of Vietnam, the northern part of Myanmar, the country that used to be called Burma. And now watch the range disappear. So in the last 500 years, it went from that to that. You still see it? From that to that. They live right here at the edge of the Tibetan Plateau. Very steep mountainous area. And why do they live there? What's that? Okay, there's bamboo there, but what is there? Why did they disappear from here? Because there was plenty of bamboo here. There still is bamboo there. But this area is flat, and this area is all farmed, and basically all the pandas were killed from there. And the place that they ended up is the only place that they can't farm. And that's why that pandas live in mountains. Pandas don't like mountains. Pandas got stuck in the mountains. And they basically were here, and then they went to the worst absolute part of their range. Right there is the most horrible part of their range, where they got stuck living now because it's the only place that people can't farm. People can't grow rice, people can't grow corn, etc. And so they're stuck up in these mountain ranges. And there happens to be some bamboo that is there. This is the only species of bear that the IUCN considers as endangered. And it's endangered because it's a very small population. We don't actually know how many. The Chinese think they know how many, but it's small, we know that. And it's very restricted range. And you can see a lot of this range has been beat up. Farming, even these very steep slopes. The Chinese have actually done pretty well in conserving this species and making a very big effort to bring this species back. This is kind of a national emblem for them, a treasure for them, okay? And so there's various conservation measures, reforestation. They have a couple different programs to reforest a lot of China and an increased number of protected areas. They have 65 different reserves set up right now just for pandas, just to protect pandas. And this is what these reserves look like. Some of them are actually quite small, separated, pretty small populations. Some of them are quite big and healthy. There's a very big gap here between these and these over here. But I talked about some of the other morphological characteristics of bears, their teeth, their claws, this special bone here. The thing with pandas is these big crunching molars for crunching on bamboo, and very special genetics for digesting bamboo. And they have special microbes in their stomach to help them digest bamboo, because basically bears are not herbivores. They come from carnivores. Bears evolved from dogs. Bears have stomachs like dogs. Bears digest meat very well. They don't digest berries and things like that very well, even though that's primarily what they eat. And they're actually terrible at digesting bamboo. Terrible at it. But they have genetics that basically make pandas not like the taste of meat. They found this out, actually. That they basically switched off the thing that makes you like the taste of meat. But they like the taste of bamboo. They eat a ton of bamboo. They sit all day and they eat bamboo. And what they do is they stick it in their side of their mouth like this, and they go, and keep biting like that. And it's basically the same size bite over and over and over again. And there's tons of this bamboo around, so they don't have to move very much. And they don't have to hibernate. They just sit there and eat bamboo all the time, but they eat tons of it. And they defecate over 100 times a day because they're eating so much of it, and it's all passing through, and they're getting very little of it. And they're a little bit sluggish because they're not getting a lot of energy from it. But the Chinese just announced that panda populations are up by 17%. And we now have 1,864 giant pandas. Not 1865, not 1863, but 1864. And you might wonder how they got this number. Well, they took advantage of the fact that pandas defecate over 100 times a day, and they basically scour the panda range, and they find as many panda feces, we call them scats, as they can, and they take advantage of the fact that pandas are very ritualistic in how they eat this bamboo, and they basically bite off these little chunks, and they take advantage of the fact that this is so poorly digested that it comes through in little whole bits like this, and you can measure these, and you can get something like an average. And what they say is that the average for this panda is different than the average for this panda and for this panda. And there are some differences among individuals. But really, so they spent $5 million scouring China for all of these different panda scats and measured them, and then came up with that exact population estimate. We do believe that panda populations are increasing in China. Their range has been expanding, but there's an issue. And the same issue that we have for polar bears as with pandas, and this is climate change. And climate change is not going to affect pandas per se, but it's going to affect their food. And their food is bamboo. And all the models show that you can see here by the end of the century, this is a decline in bamboo of 100%. There's another model, decline in bamboo by 100%. So what is a decline of 100% equal to? 0. In other words, in 100 years, 0 bamboo in the entire panda range. So nothing more to eat. And just like with polar bears, seals disappearing, with these guys, bamboo disappearing, they're sitting in the mountains, it's all agriculture to the east, there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere for the bamboo to go, the bamboo can't go up any further because of the rock and ice. There might be one solution, and this was sort of an ingenious solution that somebody came up with and said, you know, pandas used to live out here, there's still bamboo out here, this is adapted to warmer weather, why don't we just move some of this bamboo over to here? And that might actually be the way to save pandas, just by transporting some bamboo, different species of bamboo from eastern China up into the mountains. So with that, this is a brief summary of which species are going extinct. American black bears, certainly not. They're doing great. There's about 900,000 of them. 2.5 times all the other bears put together, and populations increasing, expanding. We don't have to worry about that. Brown bears, they're doing pretty well in North America, expanding in Europe. For the most part, holding on in Asia. The biggest populations are in Russia, maybe 125,000 of these bears in Russia. There's a few problem areas, but otherwise doing pretty well. We do have issues, though, with sun bears. We talked about the replacement of their forest with oil palm. Don't go buy oil palm. And what's going to happen with that in the future, we don't know, but that looks pretty dismal. We have severe issues for polar bears with the melting of their ice. We have issues of poaching for Asiatic black bears for their gallbladders. And giant pandas, I put it in purple here because maybe we can still, their populations are doing well now, and maybe with transplantation of bamboo, maybe that will help them, but that's still sort of an experimental kind of a thing. The Andean bear and the sloth bear are probably doing okay, and we wouldn't put them on the near threatened kind of a list. That's all I have for you, and I'd be glad to take any questions. Okay, we'll start here.
So those last two, are they less endangered than the American black or more endangered? The sloth and the Andean? You said gray. What is
Right, so the Indian bear and the sloth bear are listed as globally threatened, but we don't see that their populations are in a severe decline right now. Yep.
In Minnesota, how much is black bear increasing?
So in Minnesota, how much is the black bear increasing? We probably had a population that was up around 18,000 or so in the year 2000. At that point, we had too many hunters. We didn't know that the population was declining. It declined probably to about 12,000. We've cut way back on the number of hunters, and the population has gone back up to about 15,000 now. We try to get it back up to about 18,000 or so in the next 5 years.
How many black bears are harvested or allowed to be harvested each year in Minnesota?
In
Why
Minnesota.
is there a rule about having to eat the bear meat if you take the bears?
In Minnesota, you're talking about?
Yeah, is that-
So in Minnesota, we basically can control the number of bears that are taken through harvest by controlling the number of hunters. Now, it's not an exact control because we don't know how successful people will be. In some years, 24% of the hunters are successful. In some years, 15%. We don't really know. But we sort of aim for about a harvest of about 2,000 or so, something like that, which allows the population to increase. Was there a second part of the question?
Yeah, you mentioned something about eating the bear meat. If you're only allowed to, I guess, take a bear if you're going to consume.
Right. So that's a general law in Minnesota for any game species that you can't just shoot it for sport and not eat it. And so bears would be one of those, but bears would be the kind of thing that people think about as a trophy animal. That you shoot it, you take the skin, you put it on your wall, you throw out the meat. But the fact of the matter is that it's illegal to do that. Now, nobody's going to come to your house and say, did you eat that meat? But you can't say, just leave the carcass. You can't skin it out and leave the carcass in the woods. Okay, you have to at least take it home with you. You have to tag it and take it home. Now, if you threw it out at home, nobody would know it. But we did a survey of hunters, and 98% of them said they did eat the meat. The other ones said that there were some issues with spoilage, or they didn't like how the meat tasted, or something like that. That's very different, by the way, for brown bears. A lot of people don't like the taste of brown bears, and most brown bears are not eaten. And they're actually shot basically as a trophy. Yep.
How much does a big black bear weigh? What's the biggest they get?
How much does a big black bear weigh? Well, it depends where you are. But in Minnesota, we've had bears that are 650 pounds or something like that. We've had a few bears that have been a little bit more than that, 680 pounds. There are a few bears that have, in like coastal North Carolina, that have gotten up to 800 pounds, black bears.
What about Wisconsin? Pretty much the same as Minnesota.
Wisconsin is similar to Minnesota, and it really depends on what they're eating. So if it's a bear that's eating corn, they tend to be bigger. Yep.
Is there any evidence for brown bears and polar bears in breeding?
Is there evidence of brown bears and polar bears breeding? Yes. And there's actually evidence that they have fertile offspring. What we don't know is if it's more common now than it was in the past. There are more examples of it now than there were in the past, but there are way more biologists looking for it now than there were in the past. It's probably happening more because there's more brown bears overlapping where polar bears live. Brown bears are definitely moving further north. It's actually black bears are moving further north. There's a place in northern Quebec where black bears and polar bears live together. It's the only place in the world black bears and polar bears actually share the same habitat. Yep.
You went through these bears, and there are several different genera. What is something you have to have to be considered a bear? What makes them bears?
Very good question. What does it have to be considered a bear? And it's sort of a complex answer. It has to do with some skull characteristics, and basically you have to look at genetics and how, when you look at family trees, on how far back they go, what did they come from? And it's basically if they came back to the same point, So like with bears, the first ones to break off would be pandas, and then Andean bears, and then all the other bears. But they all come back to a common ancestor if you reconstruct it genetically. Sorry, it's not a very clear answer.
Kind of following that through, are there any animals in recent history who were conventionally considered bears, but then declassified as genetic and other technologies grew to better assess their characteristics?
So the main confusion has been with the pandas. And there was, a long period of history where giant pandas were grouped with red pandas as pandas and not bears. Then there was a time where at least some people put both of them in bears and considered red pandas a bear. Sort of the minority of people. And now it's pretty clear, I say very clear genetically, that giant pandas are bears and red pandas are something else. I will tell you a little side story, just as a funny thing from China, because, giant pandas only live in China. Chinese are very proud of giant pandas, a national treasure. It's their species. There are no pandas anywhere else in the world that are not owned by the Chinese. So all the pandas in the US are still owned by the Chinese. They're just on loan, okay? All the pandas are still owned by the Chinese. So they have the market on pandas. So I've done some workshops in China, and we talk about the bears of the world. And we ask the question, I give a presentation like this, and I say, there are 8 species of bears in the world. And basically they agree with that. There are 8 species of bears in the world. And then I ask the question, are giant pandas a bear? Who thinks giant pandas are a bear? Nobody. Nobody. Because they've been taught that giant pandas are giant pandas. They're not bears. Bears are just bears. Giant pandas are special. And then I would say, well, how many species of bears are there in the world? 8. Okay, wait, so there's 8, so let's count them up. And we count it, and we get to 7, and it's like, well, what's the 8th one? Isn't it a giant panda? And it's like, well, you said there were 8, so we believe you on that one, but we don't believe you that the 8th one is a panda. Maybe there's something else. Yep.
What about the koala?
The koala, so what is that? Yeah, it's a marsupial. They just live in Australia. So are there any bears in Australia? No. All right, so I showed you that. There aren't any, right? From all the range maps I showed you, there aren't any bears in Australia. Why aren't there any bears in Australia? So what's the closest that a bear ever got to Australia? So Borneo, right? Borneo is the closest. And who lives in Borneo? What species? Sun bear. So how did the sun bear get to Borneo? Did it swim? A long way to swim. What do you think? So at one point, the sea level was low enough that basically Sumatra, Java, Borneo were all connected to the mainland. They just walked out there. In fact, they probably evolved out there. But when they got to basically the eastern part of Borneo, there was water. That's as far as they went. There's a very deep trench there, and so they could not get any further, and that's why the bears never made it to Australia. Similarly, bears never made it to Antarctica. Bears have made it to, by the way, the very southern tip. You think I could say South America, right? That's true. There were bears in the southern tip of South America, but also the southern tip of Africa. All the way down to South Africa, there was a group of bears, long extinct. I didn't go through that whole group. That was a whole different group. And that whole subfamily of bears is totally gone now.
What are they called?
There's a whole bunch of different names for them. Any other questions? Yep.
The bears that nest in the wetlands, are there for conflict with snowmobiles and people?
Bears that nest in the wetlands, yes, like the bears in those cattails. I think that some of those bears actually go there to try to get away from people. That's one of the reasons that they nest in the cattails. But occasionally, there are snowmobilers and what that go by, but we've had bears that are basically nesting or denning like 30 meters from the snowmobile trail. We've had bears within 50 meters of train tracks. We've been at these dens actually working on bears with trains going by, and they hear this all winter and they seem not to be bothered by it. Some of them just sort of like the white noise, I think. Yep.
So I just saw Paddington Bear. And in the movie, the bear came from deepest, darkest Peru. Comes over to England, but didn't look like the Andean bear. So what's going on in Paddington Bear?
Paddington bear is supposed to be the Andean bear.
Really?
Yeah. And how about Baloo? Where is he from? So yeah, what country and what species? India, correct. What species would he be? The sloth bear. Yeah. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about, as you grow the population or get to 18,000 or whatever, a little bit about bears' patterns of dispersal and migration? We had the issue last year around this area of a bear that was wandering around and eventually met its demise. But if the population grows and its habitat and land use changes, how do they disperse? How do they grow in terms of population?
Okay, good question. So first of all, the main dispersers in bears are males, and females don't do very much dispersing. They sort of most females live inside their mother's home range, and they'll bud off a little bit. So the population of females can expand by basically a mother, then the daughter, then the daughter, then the daughter, like that. Whereas males will just take off, sometimes 100 miles. So a lot of the bears that end up in the Twin Cities are these roaming males that are lost. Some of them actually end up in Iowa. Like literally, they just keep going. But the ones that sort of come through all the belt of the interstates and get trapped in the Twin Cities, you mentioned that they meet their demise, and there's sort of a policy within the DNR to basically kill any bears that come inside of the interstates, and it's mainly to prevent people from chasing the bear out and the bear getting onto the interstate and having a traffic accident. That's the reason for that. But as the population increases, say up to 18,000, it doesn't necessarily have to expand geographically. There's actually room within the population that we have now, the borders of that population, to hold more bears. We're not at sort of the carrying capacity for bears. We could probably have twice as many bears in the range that we have now without it having to expand any further. There is a very small population of bears in southeastern Minnesota that probably came over from Wisconsin. We probably have about 15 bears or something in southeastern Minnesota. Yep.
You just mentioned Iowa and a family there, and in the local news, they are talking about these black bears that are wandering around Iowa. So are there more males being pushed?
Yeah, it would be primarily males that end up in Iowa.
Okay. But more so now than before?
Yes, as populations expand, and let's see, Wisconsin population is also expanding. And so the Iowa bears could also be coming from, maybe even more likely coming from Wisconsin.
Okay.
And we also have bears going into North Dakota. North Dakota actually has a small number of bears coming either from Minnesota or from Manitoba. There's populations of Manitoba's population is also expanding, coming southward. Yep.
Two-part question, please. One, do all bears hibernate? And if so, do they all hibernate the same? Like your metabolic process is the same?
Okay, let's do all bears hibernate. Let's see if we can do an audience thing. So, American black bears, yes. Brown bears, yes. And how about brown bears in like Italy or Greece or something like that? Actually, yes. for the most part. How about American black bears in Mexico? Some, not all. How about American black bears in Florida? Some, but not all. Some stay awake all year. Some of them even as far north as like Virginia don't hibernate. Okay. How about Asiatic black bears? Yeah, some, depending on where you are in the range of Asiatic black bears. If you get down into like, Thailand or something like that, they're not hibernating. But if you're up in China, if you're up in Russia, they hibernate. Okay, we got 3 so far. What about polar bears? So polar bears, it's only the pregnant females. I mentioned the pregnant females that are fasting. They're the only ones that hibernate. Everybody else, they walk around during the summer and they fast. It's probably not exactly the same kind of a thing as hibernating, but they're fasting. And when the ice comes back, they go off and they eat. So during the winter time, it's actually the best time for polar bears to feed. Think about it though, in the Arctic, middle of the winter, pitch black, 24 hours a day, and that's when they're feeding most on seals. Pitch black. Okay, but that's, I don't know, does that count as 4? Like, female polar bears are able to hibernate, okay, but the other polar bears don't. Okay, what about Andean bears? South America? Nope. What about sun bears? Southeast Asia? Nope. What about giant pandas? I mentioned this one, right? Nope. They eat bamboo. So that's it. And of those bears that do hibernate, yes, it's all the same physiology.
Does that mean, from a biologist standpoint, there's really no distinction between torpor and hibernation? Because we've been taught that is a biologically distinguishable process. Torpor is just a slowing of metabolic processes. Hibernation is something a lot more radically different from a normal metabolic process.
That's true. And it was debated for a long time among bear biologists, and people used to call it torpor, carnivore torpor. Is it similar to like a skunk or whatever? A skunk doesn't really hibernate. But we look at the physiology of a bear, and bears in Minnesota go into hibernation for 6 or 7 months. They don't eat, they don't drink. For the most part, they don't urinate. Occasionally, if they really got to go, they'll stick their butt out of the den. They don't defecate for 6 or 7 months. They'll recycle their urea. It's a pretty special type of physiology. It's really incredible type of physiology. They have incredible wound healing abilities when they're in this thing. And it's actually quite different than, say, bats, which will wake up and drink during the middle of the winter. It's quite different than some ground squirrels, which catch food, wake up during the winter. Ground squirrels will get their body temperature up to normal. They will shiver and get their body temperature up to normal. Bears, even though their temperature stays low, their temperature goes down from about a normal of 99 down to about 92. They'll shiver a little bit during the winter, but they never get up to 99 again. They might get up to 94, 95 or something like that. So it's different than some other animal hibernation, but it really is hibernation, and it really is quite special. And it could be that this deoxyribonucleic acid that they have protects their cells in this very unique kind of hibernation. And why would it be that a bear, audience question, why would it be that a bear wouldn't get below, say, 92 or 90 degrees? Ground squirrels will get down in the 40s, their body temperature. There's even a ground squirrel, Arctic ground squirrel, that gets down, its body temperature gets below freezing, down to 28. Now, why would a bear not do that? Why would a bear keep its body temperature at like 92? That uses a lot more energy to keep this giant animal at 92, cranked up there. Yeah, their insulation is really good, but still, if you really turn down the thermostat, you would eventually get cold. I mean, their skin gets really cold, their paws get really cold, but their inside doesn't. And the deal is that if you're a ground squirrel, you're like that far underground, nobody knows you're there, nobody digs you up. If you're a bear, you're this giant animal sitting maybe in the back of a den, and you got like wolves walking around hungry in the middle of winter. And if you're at like 40 degrees, the wolf just sticks its head in the den and just starts eating, right? Because you can't do anything. But if you're at like 92 degrees and a wolf sticks its head in the den, you're totally alert in seconds. And a bear can, in the middle of the winter, get up and walk out of its den, get up and swat a wolf. And we've had a number of occasions where bears and wolves have interacted in the middle of the winter, and the bears almost always do very well. We had one bear that had its nose and its ears chewed off, but it still lived. Any other questions? Yep.
Just real quick, just because I'm curious, and you can just answer with yes, yes, no, no, whatever. When the brown bears and the polar bears interbreed, is the same sex always the mother? Like, is the polar bear always the mother? So that goes back and forth. It's not like that, like a weird liger situation where it always has to be.
Correct.
Right, and then have they seen the offspring breed with other offspring? So you've got pure half and half, and pure half and half having.
No, there's not enough of those.
Okay. Thank you.
So here's the real curious thing about bears. So all of the bear species except giant pandas have interbred in captivity and produced fertile offspring, even though Andean bears have a different number of chromosomes and can still interbreed with another bear and produce fertile offspring. That's pretty miraculous, right? But it doesn't happen in the wild, obviously, because Andean bears are down there in South America.
Do they end up with the Andean bear number, the offspring, or the other bear's number?
I don't actually know the answer yet. There was some crazy zoo experiments, back in like the 1950s or something like that. People don't do that stuff anymore, mixing, species of bears with like circus type things, I will give you one more. Okay.
This is a very simple one. What is the lifespan of an American black bear in Minnesota?
Lifespan of American black bear in Minnesota. So do you want the average or the longest? Okay. All right, so the average is going to be a bit staggering. So half of the males in Minnesota do not live to 3 years old, and half of the females in Minnesota do not live to 4 years old. And why? They get shot. We're around 90% of the mortality of bears in Minnesota is due to hunting. And only about 1 or 2% die of natural causes. Once they get to be 1 year old, in the cub year, they die of natural causes. But who knows what the oldest bear in Minnesota was? It was actually one of our bears. We radio collared her, and she lived to 39. And it's not only the oldest bear in Minnesota. It's not only the oldest American black bear, but it's the oldest bear ever of any species anywhere in the world in the wild. And we had a radio collar on her whole life. And her name was number 56.
Did you ever help her out of predicaments?
In a way we did. We told people that her eyesight was really bad, she was deaf, and we asked her not to shoot her. And we put really big ear tags on her, and we told people where she lived, and people respected that. And we were really hoping that she wasn't going to get hit by a car, but she would like wander down the street, and people would come down the road and say, "Oh, that must be 56 up there," as they would go around. Sometimes walk across people's yards, walking across, and people would be yelling at her, "Oh, get out of here!" She wouldn't even look. Yeah. Where was she located? She was north of Grand Rapids, near a little town in Marcel. Anything else? Yep.
What classes do you teach at UM?
I don't teach.
Oh,
I just.
you were adjunct. What does that mean
It means I just have the luxury of not teaching and just being able to advise graduate students. So these two over here are two of my graduate students. I have one trivia question for you guys. So I showed you the last bear to go extinct in the world, which was what? 8,000 years ago. What was it called? Florida cave bear. And it was a short-faced bear that looked like an Andean bear. And went extinct in the last place in Florida. Okay. And then there are a related species of bears, all these related short-faced bears that live down in South America. But we have no bears, no short-faced bears, no evidence of them anywhere in Central America. So what's the deal? How could we possibly have one species that went extinct 8,000 years ago, another species sort of pop up in South America, and they're not even connected by Central America? So I think the answer is that the fossil record in South America is just really bad. I think that's the answer to the mystery, because we have found very few, there are a few bear skulls from South America. Most of them are actually in the ocean, sort of in the Caribbean. And there's been a few American black bear skulls that have been found there, but we just haven't found any of that Andean bears or any of that short-faced bear group there. Okay, unless there's any final question, final pressing question. All right, thanks very much for coming.